A very good morning from Liverpool, England. Today's video is going to be all about these four guys standing behind me, John, Paul, George and Ringo. I'm going to be exploring how this band from Liverpool became one of the most successful and famous bands on the entire planet. If you're interested to know a little bit of Beatles history and trivia as it relates to the city of Liverpool, where they grew up, what clubs they played in, where they actually hung out as kids, and some of the iconic venues and locations they wrote about, places such as Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields, then check out this video. I'm going to be exploring as much as I possibly can over the next few hours. So if you're ready for a self-guided Beatles tour, then join me for this one. Let's go. Just about to head down Mathew Street, which is where you'll find the Cavern. This is the place where the Quarrymen began playing in the 1950s, John Lennon's band that featured Paul McCartney and George Harrison at certain times. The Beatles played in the Cavern nearly 300 times between February 1961 and August 1963, just 6 months before the band made it in America. There we go. All the songs that have made it to #1 by Liverpool bands and solo artists. Cavern Club restaurant, but the main Cavern Club associated with the Beatles is over here. The Cavern opened its doors for the first time in 1957 as a jazz venue, but by the early 1960s its focus had shifted to rock and roll. It closed in 1973 and moved a few doors up the street, but unfortunately the original basement area where the Beatles used to play was filled in and lost forever. Just walking back up Mathew Street now, hopefully point out the entrance to the original Cavern, and maybe we'll be able to get inside the new Cavern. Lots going on. I think there's a walking tour here. I did try and get on a walking tour yesterday, but I couldn't find one for love nor money. Beatles Museum. The Beatles are not the only famous act to play at the Cavern. The Rolling Stones, Cilla Black, even Elton John have played the venue. Cavern Court, here's the original entrance. There we go, that's where the original entrance once was. Back to the new entrance, let's see if we can get in. Made it inside. £5 entrance fee. Let's see what we can find. How amazing was that? The Cavern, a piece of history here in Liverpool. Next up, I'm heading to a small statue that is very close by. There are other places to visit in the city centre, such as the Beatles Story in the Royal Albert Dock, and also the Beatles Museum in Mathew Street near the Cavern. But I have left the hustle and the bustle of the city centre, and I've made my way up to a place called Sefton Park, which is where you'll find a fairly famous Beatles icon. And we're checking that out in just a couple of moments. But first of all, I've got to say it's a beautiful place. Nearly 1 square kilometre in size, that's about 235 acres, and it's a park that was created in 1872. So I'm going to take a walk through some of this parkland, and I'll tell you a little bit about the early Beatles history as we go. The creation of the Beatles was more of an evolutionary process than the guys just sitting down one night and saying we're going to be the Beatles. So over a period of time from the late 50s, there were a number of members, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and a guy called Sutcliffe, who left the band in the early 60s and unfortunately died shortly after. There was also a drummer named Pete Best, who was replaced by Ringo Starr once the band already had a recording contract. There were 2 other people that were extremely influential in the Beatles' history, and that's Brian Epstein and George Martin. Brian Epstein was the Beatles' manager from the early days. He saw them playing at the Cavern for the first time and signed them up. And George Martin became the producer of their records. Again, from the early days, he was responsible for helping to develop that Beatles sound. In fact, George Martin was so influential to the Beatles' history and career that he was often named the 5th Beatle. By the way, I am travelling from place to place using my own car today since I've brought it along with me on the trip. But if you don't have your own transportation, you can either use public transport, the local buses, or you can join one of the tours leaving from the city centre. The Beatles did a photo shoot here in the early 1960s, but that's not the reason I've come to Sefton Park. It's because of what's ahead of me. Over there is a bandstand, and this is said to be the bandstand that inspired John Lennon, Paul McCartney writing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, one of the most commercially successful albums in the history of the Beatles. Okay, it is time we left the park behind and on towards our next stop. And that next stop is Penny Lane. City Explorer Liverpool, another Beatles tour, parts way, and I just spied this. They were huddled around it, and I think this is, believe it or not, the original Penny Lane sign got stolen so many times because of its fame and popularity that they ended up just painting the sign on this wall to save it getting stolen again. Pretty interesting. I am a little further down, and this is the place that Paul McCartney and the Beatles wrote about in their 1967 song Penny Lane. It was inspired by characters and things that Paul McCartney used to see on the bus ride between his house and John Lennon's house. He used to have to change buses here in Penny Lane, and as he would ride up on the bus, he would see lots of things that he ended up writing about in the song, such as the barber's shop, the fire station, and the bus shelter. Penny Lane was a smash hit both in the UK and around the world, and it was released as a double A-side track along with another Beatles song, Strawberry Fields Forever, a place that I'm hoping to visit next. Made it to the famous red gates of Strawberry Fields. Strawberry Fields is a former Salvation Army children's home. By the way, it's close to John Lennon's home that he shared with his Aunt Mimi, and they used to come here when John Lennon was a child to the summer fetes here at Strawberry Fields. You can see the actual children's home is behind me here. The original one that was here when John Lennon graced this area has since been demolished. It was demolished in the 1970s, unfortunately, but this is the new modernised building. And what we've got here is the children's home itself, and then a park, which is, I guess, where the Strawberry Fields Forever term comes from. In May 2000, the gates of Strawberry Field were stolen, apparently by two men in a transit, but the person that purchased them later on, thinking they were replicas, and then realised that it actually was the genuine gates from Strawberry Field, he returned them to the police, and they are now situated here inside the park. Seeing as I was so close to it, I've decided to take a quick stroll to John Lennon's childhood home, 251 Menlove Avenue, also known as Mendips. It's a place that he lived with for quite a few years between the age of 5 and 22 with his Aunt Mimi and George Smith. Just arrived here, you can see there's a plaque down there. The childhood home of John Lennon, accessible via the National Trust. There is no direct access inside the house. It was purchased, believe it or not, in 2003 by Yoko Ono, and she donated it to the National Trust. I believe they've since restored the inside of the house to look like it did in the 1950s. And there we go. There is the house itself, John Lennon's childhood home. From one former Beatles house to another, this is the childhood home of the McCartney family, 20 Forthlin Road. It is the home of Jim, Mary, Paul and Mike, and this is where Paul McCartney moved into in 1955 with his mum, dad and brother Mike. It is said by some that this is the birthplace of the Beatles. It's where Paul McCartney, along with John Lennon, wrote "I Saw Her Standing There." It is a National Trust property. It is amazing to see it. One more stop on my epic Beatles tour today, and for that we are going to have to go in that direction. And I've arrived at my final stop, St. Peter's Church. Looks like an interesting place, pretty overgrown graveyard over there, and definitely an old church here on my right hand side. Just go and familiarise myself with the area, then I'll tell you why we're here and why this is the final stop on the tour. First reason is that in this spooky graveyard lies the tombstone of one Eleanor Rigby, who died when she was 44 years old in 1939. Eleanor Rigby went on to become a big hit for the Beatles, although in later years Paul McCartney did state on the record that the tombstone and the person Eleanor Rigby had nothing to do with the character in his song. He went on to say that it is a complete coincidence that a real person named Eleanor Rigby is buried in the graveyard, but did accept that when he was a teenager, he used to come down here and sunbathe, and there is a chance that he may have seen that gravestone and it subconsciously perhaps stuck with him. And as if that wasn't a good enough way to end the video, I have one more for you, and that is that this church was the place where John Lennon and Paul McCartney first met. The chance meeting between Lennon and McCartney took place here. John was playing at a church fete and McCartney came along with a mutual friend, impressed John Lennon on the guitar, and the rest is history. What an incredible story. So as much as I've enjoyed my wanderings around Liverpool today, from the city centre right the way here to this church, I am going to end the video here, otherwise it's just going to get too long. There is so much to see here in Liverpool, and there is so much Beatles history around the city, and especially once you get out into the suburbs, places like this, the historic things that happened here are just incredible. So thanks very much for watching the video, and I will definitely see you in the next one.